Hello and welcome to Week Old Beans. We are your hosts. I am Fowler.
And I'm Ardot. Sorry, I
And we are
wanted to
here
say
to
it.
educate. Oh yeah, that was a bit.
Wanted to say. I
very
was like, I
cheery.
wanted to say it in a southern accent, like a really thick fucking country bumpkin accent, but I like gave up halfway. I didn't commit to the bit. I apologize, viewers. I failed you.
Now he's a fake southerner.
Well, you can call me a fake southerner again. I'm gonna slap the shit out of you. It's the
Please.
ultimate insult, all right? Calling me a fake southerner.
The only thing worse than being a fake southerner is being an actual southerner.
Fuck you. Tell us what we're going to be talking about today. I feel like if you've stuck around for 13 episodes, we don't need to introduce ourselves. You should know by now who the fuck we are.
Yeah, but what if we get picked up by the algorithm and suddenly we have millions of viewers?
All right,
but
for all the millions
turned off
of
by the southerner comments.
I am a southerner, so I can make those jokes, all right? I have the southern pass. Can make those fun.
We're going to talk about I guess this is Trump indictment part. I was going to say part 2 electric boogaloo, but it's more like part 4, part 5, right?
Yeah, it's like part 18 at this point. Like like I feel like there's like our podcast is just become like stay tuned to see if Trump gets indicted next. Like it's just
I mean, we're just following the media's footsteps. I mean, the media has milked the indictments for so much money and time.
oh my god, yeah. Well, and
In
it's
2016, they said that like it was like CNN gave Trump like 1.6 billion dollars of free media coverage, and I feel like the indictments are approaching that sort of number now.
good lord. Well, you know that what is it? Liberal dad on Twitter's probably or X. I'm sorry. I'm gonna. Has anybody actually started calling it X? Like I don't think that's real. I think that
I just call it Twitter.
yeah, I just call it Twitter too. It's like no. The liberal dad on Twitter's who's been saying that Trump's going to be arrested for like 6 years is going to be so happy. Like this is his like D-Day. Like this is his like storming the fucking beaches in Normandy.
If Trump does go to jail, like MSNBC is gonna have like a rave like on air. It's just gonna be amazing.
Well, you know the Fulton County the one of the Fulton County folks said that they will give him a mugshot, which I want a mugshot. Like to be real with you, I don't even like I just want to see what he looks like.
Wait, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's do.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm so like horny for this news segment right now.
Better than Palpatine.
I have to bleep that out. Fuck you. Anyway, so we're gonna be talking about the indictment number 4, which is taking place in Fulton County, Georgia, and
that is this crime is the one where he, I believe he asked the Georgian attorney general or like some other figures. He asked them to essentially give him 5,000 votes in order to win the Georgia like electoral.
Win Georgia, which is if you guys did not know, that is illegal. You cannot do that. That is a violation of many different laws, which we're going to go over here.
As it turns out, you cannot make up votes in an election. That is a no-go.
Yeah, you can't do that, guys. I know those of y'all were thinking like, oh shit, if I run for president, I'm going to do that, but you can't do that. So we're going to go over actually what this indictment says, because as they have with all the other indictments, they do have it unsealed. It is 100 pages. I think it's the longest. It's the longest indictment.
How long are the other ones?
The other ones are like 45 pages. This is 98 pages.
Is that because he's done more extensive crimes?
I think it's because
we now have more evidence.
I think it's because they've charged 18 people, where the other indictments charged maybe at the most 4.
Okay.
So so the big thing about this case is that, the other indictments have mostly been focused on Trump himself and maybe a couple of his acquaintances, such as Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman, Sidney Powell, and then who was the guy? The for the Mar-a-Lago indictment, there was the other guy. I think it was oh gosh, what's his name? One of Trump's assistants. His name eludes me. I probably should know this, considering that we literally covered it, but it feels like it was 1,000 years ago. Uh,
You're talking about John Eastman or someone else?
no, it was Nauda. Nauda, the Nauda guy. For the Mar-a-Lago
Is he
indictment.
the one? Is he the one he gave classified evidence? And they have
Yes.
tapes of him being like, "Oh, all right, should I be looking at this?" And Trump's like, "Lol, probably not." Is
Yeah,
that the guy?
yeah, yeah. Nauta
Okay.
assisted Trump in hiding the documents at Mar-a-Lago. Now, uh, this indictment doesn't only go after mention Trump; it also mentions 18 accomplices. I think 18, right? Yeah, I believe 18. Um, 18 other accomplices. So I'm going to read out the names because I do have the indictment paper in front of me. We have Donald John Trump, former president, Rudolph William Louise Giuliani, Rudy Giuliani. That's a long ass name. Holy shit. John Charles Eastman, Mark Randall Meadows. So Mark Meadows, the former secretary. What was he? Secretary of State, Fowler.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Former Secretary of State Kenneth John Chesebro, Jeffrey Bozert Clark, Jenna Lynn Ellis. She was I believe, one of the press secretaries. Ray Stalling Smith III, Robert David Shealy, Michael A. Roman, David James Schaefer, Sean Micah Tresher Still, Stephen Cliffgard Lee, Harrison William Prescott Floyd, Trevion C. Cootie, Sydney Catherine Powell, Kathleen Alston Latham, Scott Graham Hall, and Misty Hampton, aka Emily Misty Hayes. So those are the individuals that are involved in this Fulton County indictment. Now,
Are they
just
fake collectors?
well, so we have
Well, some of them are powerful figures he reached out to, but some of them are the fake electors, right? Who
yes,
were
yes, yes, yes. I mean, we have violation of the Georgia RICO Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act. For those of you who don't know, currently Young Thug is being investigated by the by Fulton County for also violating the RICO Act. The RICO Act is primarily used to go after gangs and prominent drug
organized
dealers,
crime.
organized crime.
Yeah.
It is very serious. RICO is not something that's like just kind of used willy nilly.
The RICO Act, just so people know, is basically the idea of it is if you commit a crime as an organization, everyone in the organization can be charged. So that's what RDOT means by it's mainly used by gangs, as in
Yes,
like if a gang kills a person and you're the leader of the gang, you can still be charged even if you didn't explicitly order the death of that person because you're part of the organization that made that choice. So it's
yes,
essentially a way of taking down it's a way of taking down like group criminals
yes.
essentially.
And Georgia does have. I mean, this is relevant because Georgia um, has Georgia has historically had an issue with gang violence. Like I just said, Young Thug, the rapper, he is currently dealing with a RICO charge because he did not, from what we know, directly kill somebody, but he did. He was involved in gang activity that resulted in the deaths of individuals. So yeah, RICO is not to be taken lightly. It's not used lightly either. We have solicitation of violation of oath by public officer, false statements and writings, solicitation of violation of oath by public officer. We have forgery in the first degree, conspiracy to commit impersonating a public officer, false statements and writings. We've got many false statements and writings. Filing false documents, um, conspiracy to defraud the state, conspiracy to commit computer invasion of privacy, conspiracy to commit computer trespass, conspiracy to commit computer theft. And this is all signed off by Miss Fannie Williams, or Fannie Willis, I'm sorry.
Who Ardot has been telling me Fannie Williams is an incredibly hardline
Willis.
prosecutor.
Willis, not Williams.
Or
I
Willis. She's a really hardline prosecutor, and not necessarily a positive way because apparently she really gives like harsh sentencing outside of the Trump
yes.
case.
Fannie Willis is one of her first cases upon becoming district attorney in Fulton County. she oversaw in I believe 2014 there was a mass cheating scandal that happened in Fulton County where basically teachers were conspiring across the county to help their students essentially cheat on their test, and Fannie Willis basically assisted in the mass prosecution of these teachers. It was a huge
Hmm.
thing in Georgia. So she has a reputation, and so um, she is not somebody who bows easily to threats, and she is not someone who lets people off easy. Um,
I think the amount of indictments and the speed that they're coming now kind of proves a theory I've had, which is like because indicting a president was unprecedented, all these prosecutors who had incriminating information were waiting for blood in the water because they were worried like
worried about
about the
mass
precedent
violence.
and they worried about mass violence. But when the New York case happened and there wasn't really any protest, there wasn't really a reaction, I think that led other prosecutors to be willing to go after him because it seemed like his cult of personality wasn't going to protect him and it wasn't going to inspire violence or like mass rioting or whatever.
Yeah, and that's all to say, we don't know what the State Department is getting up to because I imagine the intelligence apparatuses of the United States government are watching this, as a wise man would say, with great interest. um, you know, so this is going to be a very consequential indictment. Now, there's word that Trump might surrender himself late next week to do his perp walk at Fulton County. And like I said, there's some word coming out that they're not going to handle him with kitty gloves like he's been handled in other states and other indictments. That they are going to handle him just like they would Young Thug and all the other criminals that they deal with. So
I
I
mean, it's a tremendous career opportunity. I can't think of a better claim to fame than a prosecutor than I took down the fucking president. You know what I mean?
yeah. Um, um, so I guess I'll read through some of the indictment, but I mean it's almost kind of it's this particular indictment. I mean it's almost just all of it was so open. I think that's what's so crazy about it. All the actions he took and all the actions his group took were so open. Like there's almost not any sense in going over the nitty gritty because it's not anything we all didn't know was going to come. Uh,
We might want to still go over it because I don't think we've ever covered explicitly the election scandal. Like not even inside Georgia. I don't think we've covered it on the podcast.
oh, okay. Well, let's see. Let me scroll through this. 98 pages.
Essentially, while RDOT's looking, in the 2020 election, Trump attempted to interfere in the election in order to help him win. And so I believe he reached out to key people, including Kemp, the governor. I don't think he was the governor at that point, but he reached out
He
to
was
key
governor.
people
He
and
was
base.
he was he was governor by the time
Okay, he's
Trump reached
governor.
out to him. Yeah.
He reached out to them and he basically
Brad Raffensperger
he
was also who he reached out to. Brad Raffensperger is he was, I believe, the Georgia Secretary of. Oh fuck! Hang on. I want to make sure I'm giving y'all correct information. He was the Georgia Secretary of State during the 2020 election.
yeah, he reached out to them and he essentially said that he needed like think it was it 5,000 votes.
I
He
believe
said he
so.
needed a certain amount of votes and that he like
And just be noted,
he
he reached out to the Secretary of State because in Georgia, I'm not sure how it is in other states. In Georgia, the Secretary of State is in control of the election. They oversee
mhm.
the official election process. So that is why he reached out to Brad Raffensperger because that's who you would reach out to if you were wanting to find votes.
Yeah, so this is one of the more serious indictments. The two like big indictments I think that are the most consequential is the indictments for Jan Sex and the indictments of trying to overturn the election. Those are the two largest crimes that he did. The other stuff is like campaign finance and like that's bad, but it's not treason.
No.
like these are.
And I'm surprised that nowhere in any of these indictments has treason been mentioned. Um, I would think if I were a prosecutor that, you know, adding this all up would be considered treasonous. I don't really care how you feel about Trump. I mean, I've made this, I will always make this clear to anybody I speak to. You can feel the way you feel, believe the things you believe, but there is one thing I think that as Americans that needs to be understood, and it is respect for democracy. It is a understanding that the peaceful transition of power is what makes this country good. And you
Yeah,
know,
totally agree.
I don't give a shit if Trump was the best president in the world. I don't give a shit if he fucking cured cancer. If you do not respect democracy, if you are not, if you are going to deliberately lie, which we know he lied, uh, the election was not stolen. Joe Biden won. He did not win by, the amount I would have liked to see him win by, but he won. And, um, and if Trump had been upset with that outcome, he can feel the way he feels, but you do not get to attempt to subvert democracy. Um, and that I feel like that needs to be universally understood amongst everybody in this country.
Unfortunately, it isn't though.
Yeah.
There are in particular, he's still like, I think he's 50. He has 50 points in the Republican primary right now. He's like 20 or 30 points ahead of everyone else, and he's um but we're living in very scary times. There's interesting polling about the number of Republicans who are like believe the time for political violence is here, and it was like 20% of them. So it's just like the reality is that a lot of the democratic norms that we have been eroded by Trump.
Yeah.
And I guess you could also argue the Tea Party, although I don't think any of the Tea Party were fascistic. I think they were just crazy.
Yeah. So, with all that being said, moving on to the actual contents of the indictment itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to read all this 98 pages, like I said, but, we have, you know, essentially presenting false information to to the, um, the state government. So, just lying. Attempting to unlawfully change the outcome of the November 3rd, 2020 election. Which was done by, various phone calls to Kemp and Raffensperger. Um, if anybody listening watched the, January 6th committee that was done, he, Trump and the members and the people around him, uh, endangered the lives of, um, poll workers. Two of those poll workers actually testified before the January 6th committee. His actions endangered the safety and lives of a mother and daughter in Georgia. So let me go over the stuff in Coffee County because I think that's really, really important. I'm just trying to find it in this indictment. So basically, before noon of January 7th, 2021, Republican Party officials basically placed computer forensics teams into an election office in Coffee County, Georgia. And yes, it's spelled coffee like the drink you drink. COFFEE. Uh, they don't sell coffee in Coffee County. I don't think that's what they're known for. The forensics team basically basically over the course of several hours, the forensics team basically handled scans and like copies of the state's more sensitive voting software. There is no authorization of this under the court of law. This is illegal, what they're doing. So they basically, make a long story short, they hacked into voting information illegally. And this was days before the days after the runoff elections had taken place in Georgia. For it was Warnock's election against Herschel Walker. Um, um, there were 3 different breaches in 2021 where outsiders were given access to the state's voting equipment. And they accessed more than a dozen, or they were accessed by more than like a dozen individuals. And so this was something that was not really reported on broadly during the initial controversy in Georgia. It was mostly about the phone calls to Kemp and the phone calls to Brad Raffensperger and Trump, basically telling them to, find me the 5,000 votes. But this was a major security breach of voting data. So this involves Powell. So this is what, from what I understand, this was what Powell was involved in, Sidney Powell. Along with Hall, Hampton, and Latham. And I also think that that this is why they were also all charged with RICO cases, because it was a team effort. And I guarantee you there's going to be more indictments that come out against the forensics team. I don't know who was part of that forensics team, but I guarantee you, this will give the Georgia state government or the Fulton County government free range to also charge whoever decided to hack into that voting equipment. So this is primarily why the RICO charge was added. I think because there were other parties involved whose names that we don't probably know and who are going to also probably be prosecuted. And Powell, Latham, Hall, and Hampton face charges of conspiracy to commit election fraud and conspiracy to commit, computer theft, computer trespass, and invasion of privacy, as well as conspiracy to defraud the state. So this is somewhat new. I don't think many people knew about this until this indictment came out. Did you know about this, Fowler?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so that covers kind of what happened in Coffee County, because there's been a lot of articles popping up about what the hell's going on in Coffee County. Coffee County is a very rural town. It's 130 miles outside of Savannah. It is in the buttfuck middle of nowhere. It's nowhere near Fulton County. Do you have any comments about that, Fowler?
Sidney Powell is an interesting figure. She is famously the one who had that document she called the Kraken, which was supposed to reveal mass voter fraud. She's the crazy woman that claimed, wasn't it the ghost of Fidel Castro was in the Dominion voting machines were responsible for affecting the election.
It was like the ghost of Che Guevara or something like that.
yeah. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about this indictment is it reminds me a lot of the Russia investigation, in that during the Russia investigation there was a dozen players, mainly Paul Manafort, who were basically anytime anything involving working of the Russians happened, it was those 12 people were involved. And one of the things the indictment has really demonstrated is that overturning the election was also like that. There were a couple key players that were involved on every step of it, that were lying to the media about the election being stolen, that were behind the scenes working with officials to try and basically change the election. It was a controlled, organized effort by a bunch of people working in tandem with each other. It was not just a one-off thing of different random people doing things.
And I think that strengthens the case for the RICO charge, and I also think that it really demonstrates it demonstrates that this was not, because I think in the past Trump has really gotten away with direct responsibility in large part because for a lot of the scandals he's been involved with, he himself has never really been indicated to have been involved. You know what I mean? Like, it's been people in his circle who are making decisions to try and further their own power within the administration. Not really.
and also we have to remember the reason Mueller in the Russia investigation, he found evidence that people were tampering with the election, but unlike the election case, there was no evidence that Trump himself did it. We knew people within the Trump administration were working with the Russians, but there was no conclusive evidence that Trump ordered it or Trump knew what was happening. And I think the election case, them going with the RICO charge and going after him directly, I think it proves that he was way more present and way more radioactively criminal in this case than he was before. And perhaps that's desperation on his part. I'm not really sure why, because, as the president, if you're doing criminal things, insulating yourself from the criminal acts that you're doing is incredibly important. But, he's not the brightest, and it could be that he was desperate to not lose the election.
Yeah, I would say, like, at the very beginning, he probably didn't have a grasp on what power tastes like. I think now that he was president for 4 years, and so there's a much there's the stakes are much higher after you've been in power for that long. Um, he knew how well he'd gotten in, and he didn't want to lose it. But um, like I until we see a trial, this is just going to be something that's tucked back into the psyche of America, basically. He is running for re-election, so it's going to be one hell of a campaign cycle, I'm telling you.
I I will be I don't live there anymore like RDOT, but I grew up in the South and most of my family are Southerners. I think a lot of the MAGA people are not going to switch over.
Oh
Like
no,
I
absolutely
know I know
not. They're ride or die.
interpersonally, I know interpersonally like a couple MAGA people who like are like my level of loyalty to Trump is greater than my loyalty to the Republican Party, and I think I would be very surprised if even with all these indictments, even if he's arrested, like that MAGA crowd switches over to like someone like DeSantis. I think they'll go down with the
Yeah.
ship.
No, no. The cult of personality is too strong, and I think as we talked about yesterday, Fowler, that hurts and helps him. It
How
hurts
would
and
you say
helps.
it hurts him?
Well, it hurts and helps the Republicans. Basically, like, if Trump goes down for whatever reason, like, the Republicans will basically never hold the White House for 40 years. Um, the MAGA movement is so big and is really what the Republican Party is relying on to be relevant. Um, in a political sense, that, like, without the MAGA movement, like, I don't know, um, like, I don't know how relevant the Republican Party becomes. There's nobody that can really take up the mantle. The moderate Republicans are not, they're not, like the moderate Republican that's the most popular right now is Brian Kemp, and Brian Kemp has completely recluded himself from even involving himself in this. Um, the moderate Republicans, the governors at least, seem to be keeping themselves state bound. They're putting their heads down and saying, oh, not
The
my,
only
not my
the only
business.
person I've heard of in the Republican primary who's overtly anti-Trump is I think his name is John Hurt. He's Let me look it up real quick. But he's the only one that seems to be like overtly anti-MAGA. I guess people like Chris Christie and Mike Pence have been going after Trump himself, but
Yeah.
he's
There's the
but
other.
they're not going after the MAGA people. Like I
No.
think that's an important distinction. Where even the most aggressive anti-Trumpers within the Republican Party are afraid to directly go after the Trump voter base because of how powerful they are.
Yeah, it's and the other Republican who qualified for a debate is, what's it, Vivek Ramaswamy. I've avoided talking about him because I really I find him even more distasteful than Trump, to be real with you. I know that's like a fucked up thing to say because Trump is a fascist. I find him even more distasteful than Trump. Mostly because he's a liar. I mean, he flip flops on a weekly basis about his policy. He said that
Trump
Juneteenth.
or
Vivek
who flip
Ramaswamy.
flops?
He
Oh,
flip flops weekly on what he actually believes. He criticized the MAGA movement back in 2018. Now he's apparently pro MAGA. He's stated that Trump needs to be arrested, but then 8 months later said that Trump being arrested or being indicted is anti-American. He said that Juneteenth was a stupid, useless holiday, but then literally a week later he said that he said Juneteenth was a necessary celebratory holiday, and then literally a week later he called Juneteenth stupid. He goes back and forth about what he actually believes, and he also has no political experience. His entire political political I guess ideology is being anti woke, and his only appeal is Elon Musk tech bros, and he also has a Vegeta hairline. So all in all, just not.
well, he's not really, but he's poll numbers are not important. Like he's not actually a threat, I think, in any way.
Yeah,
Maybe if he becomes a spiritual leader of some kind, but I
I don't
doubt it.
fucking know. He's got the energy because he's like 38. So um I mean, I'm if he were to win, he would have no support of he would not have the support of the administrative state or of the broader Republican Party. Uh, so I'm not too concerned. I mean, again, I've I never say never. After Trump, I try to never say never with politics. So I'm not going to say he doesn't have a chance because I just the winds change so quickly nowadays, but. There's nobody really that can take Trump's place within the Republican circle.
I think the problem is the primary system means like if you run against Trump as a political moderate, you're going to get crushed by him in the primary. But if you try and match his energy and be as crazy as him and as overtly right wing as him, your chances of winning the general are pretty low. So they're kind of in this situation where like they're more electorally like viable candidates cannot win in the primary. So they're just stuck backing like the craziest possible people, and the Democrats can sort of more easily rally against them.
Yeah,
I think that we've seen this failure of Ron DeSantis, where in order to like not get destroyed in the polls, and it didn't work, he tried to be like super hard line right, and he has tried in some ways to be more right wing than Donald Trump, and in the process, like when Ron DeSantis entered the election initially, he was framed as like kind of a dangerous threat, like as a more competent, more bureaucratic, like MAGA player. But now he has a reputation through the primary as like an absolute maniac, and I think he's kind of doomed himself.
yeah, um, yeah, absolutely. And do you want to transition on to the next segment? I know we didn't talk a lot about the indictment itself, but I mean it is really cut and dry. Like there's nothing really within the document that's like new or stunning. I wanted to talk about the Coffee County stuff because I think that was unknown information. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the rest of the indictment is pretty standard. What we saw play out in 2020. Um,
Yeah, we could maybe this would be a good time to talk about democracy and the delicacy of it within a democratic state.
Absolutely.
Democracy is the one type of government that can be ended at any point in time by enough of the people getting together and saying they don't want a democracy anymore. And that's what makes elitists and sort of intellectuals, I think, very afraid of mass politics and populism. Is they're terrified of the idea of a charismatic outsider figure with questionable morals and like authoritarian designs, basically tricking enough of the electorate into backing them in order to end democracy. And Trump is sort of the embodiment of what a lot of the early thinkers who were anti-populism and anti mass politics, like he's the embodiment of what they were afraid of.
Yeah. Democracy is not inevitable. Democracy takes work. Um, and the farther away we get from having to uphold our democracy and understanding the importance of democracy, the easier it is for figures like Trump to slip in. Um, and it's one of the things I've realized studying democracy is, it's like what you said. It only works if enough people want it to work, but then it also um, but then it's also a situation where, like, you know there are a surprising number of people who would just prefer to live under a dictatorship. And I think the MAGA movement is the perfect example of that. Um, I think that segment of Americans has always existed. They just shifted their priorities over time. Not to essentialize, but with a population as large as the United States, like, not everybody's going to have the same, you know, I guess, vision for America.
I mean,
Um,
we've brought up Huey Long, the dictator of Louisiana, the governor who centralized power on himself, or Father Coughlin, the radio priest who preached to tens of millions of America, essentially fascism and anti-Semitism. I think history has shown that when times are bad and inequality is high, like there is always a demand for those kinds of people.
yeah, yeah, no, it's or when there's social change. I wouldn't even say when things are bad, because I don't think things were bad when Trump was elected. I think Trump was a response to the Obama era, and a certain subset of Americans being very, very upset that Obama was allowed to be president to begin with. Um, Trump is a fundamentally reactionary force.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's possible too. Like in a country with our history and our that is also something that has to be feared. And I think what saves Trump is the fact that he's too stupid to have a genuine plan for his proposed dictatorship. And his dictatorship is entirely narcissistic, and or his desire for a dictatorship is entirely self-absorbed and narcissistic. Um,
Talking about retribution, or sorry, backlash, reactionary backlash. I mean, it's not a coincidence that after the '60s with LBJ and the society and the passing of all the civil rights acts, that began the golden age of conservatism in this country. Like it's often the case historically that lots of progressive reform leads to those who don't want that progressive reform responding aggressively and mobilizing. I mean, the same thing was in the case after slavery was abolished. Like losing the Civil War and slavery being abolished is why the Ku Klux Klan became so powerful and why they became such a force of nature.
yeah, and it's and America has always weathered those, and I think it's because we've never had a fascist get as high as Trump. Like, my dislike of Trump is not even really on the basis of like anything personal. Like, America has had dog shit, racist, xenophobic, shitty presidents. We've had many. I mean, it's not. But what makes Trump so dangerous is he's the first president to get into power who has genuine fascistic ideations. Um, we've come close before with people like Huey Long and I think the other was like what, Frederick Douglass
George
or
Wallace.
George Wallace. I'm sorry, Frederick Douglass. What the fuck, George Wallace? I'm sorry, I'm playing Grand Theft Auto right now, guys. Uh,
During the podcast, the shame.
well, it helps me focus. Look, sometimes playing video games makes conversations better for me. Um,
Yeah, you need to get that Hassan money and go to Twitch then. If you're a
I'm
video
literally I'm
gamer
just
and
driving around hitting people in my car in GTA right now. I'm not actually playing a video game. But yeah,
we
no,
call
like
we call that the Caitlyn Jenner maneuver.
yeah, she transitioned and then decided to be a bad driver, really filling the stereotype. I should have gotten a laugh out of you for that shit. was a golden joke. 10 out of 10. Anywho, uh, but Donald, Donald Trump is the first president we've had who has gotten, to the seat of power who is a fascist, and I think that's what makes him dangerous. Like him, rip to the Mexicans, but like, you know, it's their turn now. Every other president has used black people.
I think it's interesting how so I've read about George Wallace. He's a very interesting figure. And one of the points that's made in learning about George Wallace is George Wallace used racism to achieve his goals. He was famously like the most powerful segregationist. He was a Dixiecrat. He famously said, I think it's like segregation now, segregation
Segregation tomorrow,
forever.
forever, or some shit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And but like George Wallace didn't ever let the crazies take out power. He would work with the Ku Klux Klan, but the Ku Klux Klan were never allowed a seat at his table. He did not allow the racist bigot to like dictate his policy. Like he would give them policy himself, but he was always in control. They were just allies of his who were never really allowed like a real seat of power. And I think Nixon is similar, but like Trump is kind of the beginning. Like Steve Bannon was like a white nationalist. He's an anti-Semite. He was the national security advisor.
Stephen Miller.
Stephen Miller was, yeah. So I think Trump, what a lot of Trump is it's like the crazy racist has always been the crutch that the modern Republican Party has used to pull votes. But Trump is the beginning of like, we're not appealing to crazies. The crazies are in charge. It's not like we're doing racism and reactionary
Strategically.
bullshit in order to, yeah, strategically to get votes. Like the point of our policy is bigotry. The point, it is not like we are mainly doing conservative economic business policy and then occasionally we throw out these like racist symbolic gestures. No, the racism is the point. And I think that's another thing that makes him really dangerous is that like Trump is in many ways I think a true believer of that racist reactionary politics. People forget that like Trump before he became the president, he is one of the people that spread the rumors initially that President Obama was Kenyan and not a real American. He famously said that the Central Park Five should have been executed, who are these black teenagers who were arrested for supposedly a really hideous rape that happened in Central Park. And Trump said, like, even if there was no evidence to convict them, that they should be killed. He's always been like, you know, a genuine racist, and his policies reflect that.
Yeah, and so, and even less so his policies. I think he surrounded himself with some of the most dangerous people. Like he's his enablers are some of the most vile racists you will ever meet, and that's never really happened before. Um, it's the fact that he met with Nick Fuentes. I mean, I think that should have been. I think sirens should have been going off in everybody's fucking mind when he had a meeting with fucking Kanye West and Nick Fuentes.
I wonder though. So I think to some degree, there's been an inoculation of Trump, where like early Trump in the 20 like 16, 2017, 2018 time period, like Trump was like no one ever called Trump fascistic or truly reactionary. Like people were outraged by him, but there wasn't really the vocabulary to describe him correctly, and there wasn't really like the system was shocked and they were kind of just responding to him
Yeah,
ineffectually. And I think to some degree like Americans have become inoculated, not all of them obviously, but a lot of them have become inoculated to his bullshit. Like Trump's spectacles and his performances and the crazy things he says, they get media attention, but it's no longer like that open-mouthed shock. Like, and I think a lot of Democrats now are sort of used to it and are like able to mobilize against it. So
yeah,
I wonder if he will be so effective now, because I feel like so much of what allowed him to be effective initially was the element of surprise, because he was so unique, and it's been decades since we've had a figure like him in national politics. That I think the Democrats were particularly paralyzed by it.
yeah. Well, we've like especially going from because I think like we like even with like Nixon and Watergate, like Nixon was Nixon did not have that flair and that performance that Trump had. He did monstrous things, obviously, with Watergate and everything, but he there was a certain, I guess, a certain performance that you did as president, and Trump really upended that, and I think it shocked people, and I think now, people recognize his game. People, he's unpredictable in all the he's unpredictably predictable. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I don't think that points to him being a good politician. I think it points to him being I think it points to my belief that everything he does is self-absorbed and narcissistic, and that, you know, like if Trump were to ever become dictator of America, like, we talked about this yesterday, like he's in the position where he's too crazy to be controllable, but he is like that, like there is no ideology behind his beliefs in the way that, like, you had, Hitler with the Nazis, and, Mussolini with his shit. Um, Although Mussolini was really just following Hitler a lot of the times.
Well, ironically, Mussolini is the first fascist. Like Hitler is later. Hitler's way more important historically, but Mussolini was he was one of the first socialists to basically become fascistic.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the one of the things that Trump has shown is like the norms of democracy, of like accepting the results of elections, of like not using your power as a means to hold yourself in office. Like all of these things are gentlemen's agreements. There aren't a lot
Yes.
of laws stopping you from doing that. And for so long, the norms of democracy kept the country stable. But I don't know if that's the case anymore or will be in the future, because the reality is that if Trump doesn't go to jail, if there isn't punishment for Trump, um, there are a lot of people who will look at that as a precedent that they can also be undemocratic and
Yeah.
authoritarian, and they can get away with it as long as they win,
Yeah.
which
Now,
is a very scary precedent to set in a country.
I just want to, we're at the 48-minute mark, but I really just want to end this by pointing something out, to listeners, because I think this really hammers home everything you just said, Fowler. When George Washington was elected president, and he was president for his term, he decided to resign voluntarily. He decided to step down as president of the United States, which at that time, in the 1700s, was unprecedented for a leader to do. For a leader to say, you know what, I'm gonna step down from my position. Um,
And this is also the George Washington that was offered to be a king at the end of the Revolutionary War and turned down being the king of America.
yeah, and that was the action of one great man, the best of us. And I think I always keep that in the back of my head, because it is a gentleman's agreement. Democracy is a gentleman's agreement. Society is a gentleman's agreement. Um, and it only takes one person to do the wrong thing. So, do you have any closing statements, Fowler, before I shut this baby down?
Yeah, I think the last thing is I think it's really important now in this time of great inequality and fear for people to be very careful of outsiders. And outsiders aren't necessarily a bad thing. We're both Bernie supporters, and he was definitely an outsider. But like, it's important, no matter how disillusioned you are of the system, to when you find outsiders or challengers in government, to see how they're outsiders and to be careful of those that are outsiders in ways that are dangerous performatively, who delegitimize their political opponents, who refuse to do norms that are important for maintaining democracy, because a lot of these people um, are ultimately a threat to not just the systems that we all hate, but the republic itself.
Yeah, well, they're not just a threat to the systems that we all hate, but also to the systems that really keep our shit together, and that people
Yeah,
take for granted. Uh, And I think that's a big thing too. I mean, that's always been my thing. Like I'm not, I don't, I'm not down with the anti-Americanism because I think a lot of people who have not been outside of the United States and who have not heard the experiences of people outside the United States really take for granted. You know, obviously there's problems, but we are incredibly lucky to live in the United States of America. Uh, incredibly, incredibly lucky. And um, and like you just said, like the outsiders that come in that say that they can take away the things that you hate will also take away the things that you like. So most of the time, that norm there's a there typically that's how it goes. Um, so I guess that's it for this. Fucking what was it 13? God, I'm happy we're continuing this podcast, feller. I've enjoyed it. Uh,
Me too.
uh,
Especially now that we've changed the name. That was my main gripe.
sure. Anyway, I changed the name. Um, but thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully next week we'll have some more breaking news. I don't know, indictment number 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Fuck it, every station indict, I think, at this point. Montana, fucking North Dakota. I don't know what they can come on. They can find something probably. Uh, but thank you guys so much for watching. And I will see you all in the next podcast.